You ever have that one coworker who somehow manages to do the absolute bare minimum, but still slides under the radar? The kind of guy who magically avoids consequences while everyone else drowns in extra work. If you've worked in any kind of office, you know exactly the type of person I'm talking about. For me, that person had a name: Seth. From the very first week I started working in my department, Seth made himself known. Not because he was a hard worker or a genius problem solver. No, Seth was the guy who showed up late every morning with the same tired excuse about traffic. He'd walk in with his coffee in hand, mumble something about how the roads were crazy today, and then vanish from his desk for the next 40 minutes, usually under the guise of catching up on emails. Translation: scrolling through his phone while pretending to type. I thought maybe I was just being judgmental at first. Everyone has rough mornings, right? But it didn't take long to notice the pattern. Seth's version of working hard was figuring out new and creative ways to avoid actually working. He'd suddenly need to take his morning bathroom break every 10 minutes, dragging it out so long that people joked he must have been reading entire novels in there. If there was a task that required focus, you could guarantee Seth would somehow disappear right when it was assigned. And lunches? Oh, lunches were an adventure. While the rest of us had a strict hour, Seth's quick lunch could stretch into 2 hours, sometimes even more, with him returning just in time to complain about how full he was and how the afternoon slump was hitting him. Unfortunately for me, Seth decided I was his favorite person to delegate to. At first, it came off like innocent requests. He'd shoot me an email with something like, "Hey, could you give me a hand with this?" Or, "Mind looking this over real quick?" But what he really meant was, "Here, take this entire project off my plate so I can go sit in the break room." And like the gullible team player I was back then, I actually did it. I wanted to be seen as helpful. I wanted to show I could pull my weight. But Seth quickly figured out I was the perfect target. And once he had me pegged, he didn't let up. 6 months of this nonsense went by. 6 months of him dumping his work on me while somehow getting the credit. 6 months of me staying late to finish things that weren't even mine, while Seth strolled out early with a grin on his face. And the worst part? Every time I tried to bring it up with my boss, Seth would slip through the cracks like an eel. He had this way of twisting things to make it look like I had volunteered, or that he had just asked for clarification, and I had insisted on helping. My boss, who was constantly juggling 10 fires at once, bought it every single time. Seth walked away squeaky clean, and I was left fuming. The final straw came on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember it clearly because I was actually looking forward to a slow week. My own workload was under control, and for once, I thought I might get to leave on time every day. Then Seth dropped a bomb on me. A major report, one that was supposed to be delivered to a client in just 2 days, was suddenly too overwhelming for him to handle. He emailed me the spreadsheets, barely 2 sentences attached, basically saying, "Can you help me clean this up? I am swamped," which was laughable because I had literally watched him spend half the morning playing some mobile game on his phone. I stared at the email, feeling my blood pressure spike. This wasn't just a little extra busy work. This was a high-stakes project that our team's reputation with the client depended on. And Seth had the nerve to dump it on me with barely any time left. That night, I sat at home stewing. I thought about every time I covered for him, every late evening I'd stayed because of him, every smug little smirk he wore when he walked out early. And that's when it hit me. If Seth was so good at pushing his work onto me, maybe it was time I pushed back. Not with complaints to the boss. Those never worked. Not with confrontation. He'd just spin it and make me look bad. No, if I was going to deal with Seth, I had to do it on his terms. Quietly. Subtly. The opportunity came the very next day. I was making small talk with Seth in the break room when I casually asked, "Hey, are you any good with Excel? I'm trying to figure out some advanced formulas." His eyes went wide, and he chuckled nervously. "Excel? Oh man, I barely know the basics. I just kind of copy and paste stuff until it works." Perfect. Later that afternoon, Like clockwork, Seth forwarded me another set of spreadsheets with his usual lazy request. This time, though, I didn't refuse. I smiled at my computer screen and thought, fine, Seth, you want me to handle your spreadsheets? I'll handle them. I spent that evening crafting my little masterpiece. I embedded a series of hidden formulas throughout the documents. Nothing that would be immediately obvious, just small, subtle functions tucked away in hidden cells. They didn't break the spreadsheets outright, but they warped the numbers in ways that only someone who actually understood Excel could spot. And if someone, say, tried to copy and paste the data into another file without knowing what was there, the entire thing would scramble itself into a confusing, unusable mess. It was beautiful, elegant even. I wasn't sabotaging the company or risking my own job. I was just making sure Seth's laziness finally caught up to him. When the day of the report deadline rolled around, Seth was as carefree as ever. He strolled into the office late, stretched like he'd just woken from a nap, and spent most of the morning joking around with another coworker. Meanwhile, I kept my head down, pretending to be focused on my own projects, all while suppressing a grin. Then the call came. The client, furious, had rung up our boss. Apparently, the report Seth had submitted was filled with nonsense numbers, data that didn't make sense, charts that contradicted themselves. The client was demanding answers. Suddenly, Seth's casual attitude vanished. I watched him scramble back to his desk, his face pale. He opened the spreadsheets, frantically clicking around, trying to figure out what went wrong. But every time he fixed one cell, 3 others seemed to break. His copy-paste method was working against him, and he was spiraling. At one point, he came over to my desk, sweat on his forehead, and stammered, "Hey, do you have a second? Something weird is happening with the report. I think the file is corrupted or something." I tilted my head, feigning confusion. "Really? That's strange. Maybe it's just a glitch? Did you try restarting it?" He gave me a desperate look, like I was his last lifeline. But I shrugged sympathetically, offered some vague advice about checking formulas, and went back to my own work. Inside, I was relishing every second. Seth spent the entire day at his desk for once, hammering away at the spreadsheet, muttering under his breath, running his hands through his hair. Every time a phone rang, he jumped, terrified it was the client again. For the first time since I'd known him, he was actually working hard, and I knew he was doomed. By mid-afternoon, the office was buzzing with whispers. Everyone could see Seth sweating bullets, hunched over his computer like his life depended on it. Normally, he'd be the one strolling around making small talk, distracting people, or sneaking off for his 3rd bathroom break of the hour. But today, Seth didn't even look up from his screen. At one point, another coworker, Melissa, leaned over and whispered to me, "What's up with him? He looks like he's fighting for his life over there." I just shrugged and said, "I think the client wasn't happy with his report," which technically wasn't a lie. Seth's panic only escalated when our boss stormed out of her office. She had the kind of presence that could silence a room in seconds, and the look on her face that day could have curdled milk. "Seth," she thundered, and everyone froze. Seth practically jumped out of his chair and scurried into her office, clutching his laptop like a shield. The door slammed behind him. The walls weren't exactly soundproof, and although we couldn't hear every word, the muffled tones carried enough. Her voice was sharp and commanding. His was desperate and defensive. Every now and then, a louder word would slip through: incompetent, deadline, client unacceptable. By the time the door opened again, Seth looked like a ghost. His tie was crooked, his hair was sticking up, and his eyes were wide like he'd just been chewed up and spit out. He stumbled back to his desk and sank into his chair, avoiding eye contact with everyone. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I was savoring it. This was months of pent-up frustration finally paying off. Over the next few hours, Seth tried everything to fix the spreadsheets. He Googled tutorials. He asked Melissa if she knew any tricks. He even called his cousin. Yes, his cousin, who apparently was good with computers. Nothing worked. The hidden formulas were doing their job beautifully, and every patch Seth attempted only made things worse. By the time the office day ended, Seth was still glued to his desk, refusing to leave, muttering under his breath like a man possessed. I went home that night and slept better than I had in months. The following morning, Seth actually showed up on time, early even. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept a wink. His shirt was wrinkled, and he had dark circles under his eyes. He didn't even stop to chat with anyone. He just marched straight to his desk and resumed his hopeless battle with Excel. I could hear the frantic clacking of his keyboard from across the room. By mid-morning, the client had called again, demanding to know why the corrected report still wasn't delivered. Our boss lost it. She stood in the middle of the office, practically shouting, "This is unacceptable. We look incompetent because of this mess." Then she turned to Seth with the kind of icy stare that could cut glass. "Fix it now," Seth stammered. "I am trying. I don't know what's wrong with the files." But she cut him off. "You've had 2 days. This was your responsibility." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone was watching, and for the first time, Seth couldn't weasel his way out. He couldn't blame it on traffic, or a system error, or someone else dropping the ball. This was squarely on him. He glanced at me then, a desperate, pleading look in his eyes. I raised my eyebrows, tilted my head slightly, and gave him a sympathetic smile. "Sorry, Seth," I said softly. "I really don't know how to fix something like that. Maybe you should ask IT." It was the perfect out for me. Helpful on the surface, but useless in reality. IT wasn't going to untangle the carefully planted chaos in those files. By lunchtime, Seth was spiraling. He hadn't moved from his desk, his tie had been tossed aside, and he was literally muttering, come on," under his breath as he clicked through the spreadsheet. Then the inevitable happened. Our boss called him back into her office, this time with the department head on a video call. The door shut, and the meeting dragged on for nearly an hour. When Seth finally emerged, his face was beet red, and his hands were shaking. He packed up his things in silence, stuffed them into his backpack, and walked out of the office without saying a word. Later that afternoon, our boss gathered the team and announced that Seth had been placed on temporary leave without pay while performance issues were reviewed, which, in corporate speak, meant he was in serious trouble. The office practically buzzed with gossip the rest of the day. People were whispering theories about what happened, replaying the moment he stormed out, wondering if he'd ever come back. Melissa leaned over again and whispered to me, "Do you think he's done for?" I gave a little shrug and said, "Hard to say, but I think he'll be doing his own work from now on." And that was the truth. Seth had finally been forced to face the consequences of his laziness. And it wasn't because I tattled to the boss or made a big scene. It was because he underestimated me and overestimated himself.